Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com, Wil Schroter. Wil, it's no secret, I don't think, to anybody that listens to the podcast, that you've said many times that, entrepreneurship was what kind of yanked you out of being a kid with nothing to founder with full control over their destiny, to the extent that we have full control over our destinies as founders or anyone. But here's the question, man. Like, I want you to back into that. I want you to talk about how that worked for you. And I think today we want to talk about, like, can that same ladder be climbed by millions of other people who start where you did or start anywhere on a relative scale? And can it be used to alleviate or eliminate poverty?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it can be used universally, like pull everybody out of poverty.
Sure.
But I think what it can do, and I know you feel the same. I feel like what entrepreneurship can do is it can create a flywheel that starts things going. Right? If we look at it, it's how America was built on that flywheel, right? Where these industrialists started to build what became modern day America by planting those seeds, and in most cases, they came from nothing, and they were able to use what became the American dream in order to build this next generation of wealth and success. And I think about this a lot. This was my story. I was the kid that came from nothing, and worked really hard and, pursued the American dream. I genuinely believe that is accessible to a lot of people. Now, when I explain my story and say, hey, I lived the American dream, here's typically what I get in today's environment, right? I get, look, you're a middle-aged white guy. Of course you had the American dream, right? Like, and I get it, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't quite that easy. And so, I came from a very difficult childhood in a very underprivileged environment. And I guarantee you, by the time I was graduating bottom of my class in high school, no one was like, oh, smooth sailing for that guy. They were
Right.
like 18 months before he's in jail, tops, right? Like
Uh-huh.
there's nobody who's betting on my horse, and at least of all me, by the way. But what I discovered almost inadvertently was that I had the ability, through no one else's help, by the way, right? I think this is the most important part. And by no one else's help, but also no one else stopping me either, right?
Yep.
To be able to create and develop a life for myself through entrepreneurship. I would have been a terrible employee. That would have not gone well for me, just not the way I'm built. But it turns out I was a pretty good entrepreneur. And Ryan, I think when we look at the opportunities of planting that seed, someone, early in their life, not that it's the only time they could do it, I do think it is one of the most valuable things we can teach a generation that is underprivileged, that is in poverty all around the world. This isn't just, United States or anything else like that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think teaching people to fish, the old adage that if you want to feed a man for a day, you give him a fish. If you want to feed him for the rest of his life, you teach him to fish. And I genuinely believe that entrepreneurship is that fishing pole, that ability for you to earn for yourself, but more importantly, to create a flywheel in your community and pull
Yeah.
more people around it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the flywheel concept is super important, and we've seen it. You and I have seen it. It can change communities. It can change families. It can change entire countries. Right?
Absolutely.
When that entrepreneurial spark starts, I mean, like you said, that is sort of what created the United States.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we can't overlook that. Right? It doesn't mean that entrepreneurship is for everyone, meaning that not everybody has to be a founder. Everybody has to start their own business, but in some of these communities, in some of these situations, when someone does that, right, and then all of a sudden you're creating employment, you're creating opportunities, you're creating secondary economies that flow down into that.
Right.
Right? Like, having recently left Latin America and Guatemala in particular, where there were a ton of impoverished people, right? It's also a massive hustle culture, right? People didn't sit around and go, impoverished, don't know what to do. They were like, what am I going to go do today? What am I going to sell? How am I going to do this? Somebody would start a business. Business would start to grow, right? We saw somebody build little things like a very local restaurant, right? Well, the local restaurant creates a secondary economy because you've got some people that work there. They're buying from the local farmers, right? The local farmers bring up. Local farmers start to make more money. They start to feed more money into the economy. And you get it. Like the whole thing snowballs. It's economic development as it's supposed to work, right? Somebody generates economic opportunity. There's trickle over, trickle down. And all of a sudden you start to see things blossom. And I think the other thing that gets lost in the mix in a lot of cases, when we start saying like, yes, entrepreneurship can solve some of these problems, people go like, yeah, of course you guys think that way because it's what you've done. yes and no, but I also think that, and this is what the piece that I think gets lost, is that it's such an extensible set of skills. Like at its core, and I think you said this, like you learned that you could do this on your own,
Yep.
right? With nobody else's help and nobody else getting in your way. Right? It teaches you a lot about self-reliance, which is going to be useful no matter what you end up doing. So I think we're not saying, entrepreneurship at the expense of everything else, but we're saying it's a set of skills that if you master them, or even just learn them, understand them, intellectualize them, it can impact a lot of what you do in life.
Well, also, it has this massive germinating effect of everybody around you. Okay. So
Yeah.
if you think about this, it wasn't that Will started a company earlier, the company did well. It was that while he was doing that, how many other people did Will impact along the way? How
Oh,
many other
100%.
people did he employ at an unreasonably young age, not mine, but theirs, and incentivize and condition that they could do it? I've told you this before. In my lifetime, I've hired thousands of people.
Yeah.
Within that group, I keep a list, a summary, if you will, a spreadsheet, call it what it is, of all the people that I've employed that have gone on to
Yep.
become CEOs, right? It's well over 100 people that I've employed. Just me,
It's
little old
wild.
me. I'm not like that
Yep.
important. I'm not being modest. I'm just like, I'm not freaking Steve Jobs, right?
Right.
100 people that I've employed have gone on to become CEOs, not VPs. I'm not counting anybody that was. It's also great job, by the way, right? Like
Right.
other C levels. I
These
mean,
are specifically the ones
specifically
that made it to top seat.
the CEO,
Yep.
in most cases, founders, right? In some cases of massive companies, like representing billions and billions of dollars. And so, what we're really talking about, we're saying alleviate poverty. It's not making everybody a founder, it's making enough people founders
Yep.
that flywheel in their community and the people around them elevates. And I think it's incredibly powerful and wildly misunderstood about how we get there.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it'd be funny to look at that list. I mean, fun, interesting to look at that list now and just see like how many people have they employed,
Oh, that's what I'm saying.
right?
That's what I
How
mean,
what
right?
does that spread look like, right?
Right.
It's funny. Let me give you the other end of that spectrum. These were not CEOs, but it goes back to just like how a little bit of entrepreneurial spark can go a long way. When I was a kid, we used to do like when there'd be snow days. I think I've told you this story before. And there were snow days. I got so excited, not because we had the day off of school, but because I knew I could go shovel snow. All right.
Right. Make money.
I didn't just shovel snow. I had a tractor. I would drag driveways. I would bring friends along. I had a group of friends who then on Sundays they would call me. They're like, "Are we going? Are we going?" Because they knew we were going to make hundreds of dollars that day as, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. We would go out and we were all doing other entrepreneurial stuff too, but like it was super fun to see that, like, because I had figured this thing out and I had the drive to do it, all of a sudden people would flock around that. They were like, "We want to go too." Load up a bunch of guys into the tractor and we go out. I drag driveways, shovel the sidewalks, and everybody made money. Right.
Right.
And it
Right.
was super motivational. And it was fun because at least a couple of those guys went on to be entrepreneurial. Now, I don't think I caused it, but I was certainly part of that journey where they were like, "Hey, I can just go out and find my own way, make my money. I don't need to go get a job. I can just go find ways to hustle and make money." Right. Which I think is super powerful to teach people.
You planted the seed of hope. And I think
Yep.
this is where it starts. My own story that I've given to you before of when the seed of hope was planted for me. I'm 8 years old. I'm a kid who couldn't even afford lunch, incredibly poor, generally didn't know where my parents were. Every day before I would go to school, I'd be at the bus stop. And one day I had scrounged up a quarter for whatever reason. Lunch was $1 at the time because I went to school in the Stone Age. And I go across the street and I buy some Now and Later candies with my quarter because that's what I was going to eat for
Yep.
the day. Like that was my meal provision. I hop on the bus and a kid asked me if he can have one. I'm like, really can't. And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but like I literally that was my lunch. And it's by the way,
Yep.
being poor is humiliating. And one
Yeah,
of the things
sure.
that they don't put in the brochure. And so I was like, can't. And he's like, well, what if I give you a quarter for one, right? And I was like, fine. He gives me a quarter. I give him the Now and Laters. He hands them all back. It only takes one. And what he meant was,
Uh-huh.
I'll buy one of them for a quarter.
One of them. Yep.
And somebody else overhears and say, hey, can I buy one? And I'm like, yeah. He gives me a quarter, and like my head explodes. Like I had
Right.
no idea how commerce worked,
The concept of arbitrage is born in Will's mind.
but
Yeah.
that was the moment, right? And I told you this before. At lunch that day, I went to the lunch lady and I gave her the first dollar I'd ever earned to buy my own food. I mean, very appropriate for what we opened up with, which was teach a man to fish. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was game on from that point on, right? It was the first time I realized, without anybody
Yep.
teaching me, I just fell into it, that I could create my own outcome. And that is an
Right.
incredibly powerful, incredibly, I mean, transformational, changed my whole life. on a
Yeah.
random Tuesday that you'd have never guessed, right? And I realized at that moment that my condition in life didn't determine what I was allowed to do. And that created a seed of hope. That's all it did. It created a seed of hope. And Ryan, how many founders do we talk to that sold candy in school? That
Soul
shovel
candy.
driveways, like,
Literally I had the lemonade wagon, not the
right.
lemonade
We
stand,
all
but
did,
like same
right?
damn thing, right? It's such a funny thing that it's a lesson that gets learned so early in life. And again, just a seed, not even necessarily a lesson. It's a lesson of sorts. But I think that there's something really interesting too, that it tends to start early and it starts small, right? It doesn't take
Correct.
much. I think that's the thing
That's the
that's
point.
so encouraging about
It was
this.
a
Like
dollar.
for anybody else who's listening and is saying like, yeah, I don't really buy into this. And like, it can start super small,
That's
right?
the whole point.
We're not saying turn somebody who's in what would otherwise look like a hopeless situation, resourceless situation, into the next, tech founder of a unicorn. It doesn't have to be that either, right? It was selling candy, it was shoveling snow. And that was the other thing. So going back to hope, I don't remember exactly. I do remember that it wasn't like the first time I went out and I was like, hey, does anybody want to go shovel snow with me? And everybody's like, yeah, we'd love to.
Right.
Right. It was after like the third or fourth time that I had gone out and made a couple $100s, and they were like, there's some hope, right? Some hope was created. Like, I hope I make some money too. Like, I will go do that. And again, it was just a little seed got planted, and then that's where it starts to spread to others as well.
It's where it spreads. There's something called jealousy that is also a very powerful motivator, right?
Super.
We always see it now. We see it like in the startup world, where you see one of your, what we'd call your idiot friends, get funded, and you're like, dude, if that guy can do it, that guy's an idiot,
funded,
right?
This can't be that hard, right?
I always joke that the reason there's 100 people on that list of CEOs was because of me, because they were all like, dude, if that guy can be a CEO, I can absolutely.
I've got
I
this.
set the bar so low.
What's after CEO? I'm going to do that.
But I want to talk about, 3 different legs that this thing needs to stand on, but I don't want to lose sight of the hope component. The reason hope is so fundamental before everything else as a requirement is actually because we deal in the business of hope. And I don't mean that like in a greeting card way. I mean, if it weren't for hope, we wouldn't go pursue things that pay no money, right? That would make no sense whatsoever, right?
Let me go build something that's never existed before to see if people want to buy it and make it enough fun that I want to keep doing this for a long time until it's finally successful.
Absolutely.
No.
Um,
There's no hope behind that.
Correct.
It ends very quickly.
If we take away hope and reward, okay, reward is kind of a given that if you do something extraordinary, that's reward. Now, that doesn't exist everywhere, right? If you're in a society that fundamentally doesn't reward risk, or a culture that doesn't reward risk, right? For a lot of cultures, they are culturally biased against entrepreneurship because they don't believe in risk. I talk to this with a lot of my friends who are coming from like an Indian family or an Asian family. They're like, risk is not like celebrated the way you guys celebrate it.
You follow the most likely path with the shortest distance to the largest reward, right?
100%,
like,
right?
You follow the educational path and you become doctor, lawyer, engineer, right, and that's it.
And to be fair, that's 100% logical.
Yeah.
Right? That's 100% logical. That is a very obvious and logical path to go, which is the problem, right? The problem being, in order to go down this path, you have to have the hope of doing the illogical and having that have a better outcome. If you're not inspired, if you don't have that hope that something better is going to happen, you won't even try. We look at it and we say, someone has to feel so good, so confident, if you will, or hopeful. Hope and confidence aren't the same thing. So hopeful that what they're about to embark on, however small, will have the reward they expect it to, that they're willing to do it at all. And given we're in the business of hope, that is a form of capital that when you take it off the table, nothing even gets started. We don't even get to the parts where you need like dollar capital, right? If in a society, if in a community, if in a family, hope has been withdrawn, you will never see entrepreneurship.
Correct. Yeah. And I think, again, like it's, as you said, it is a currency in the entrepreneurial space. Hope isn't fairy dust. It's fuel. It is literally what drives us. At certain points, it is all we have, right? At the earliest stages, and sometimes in the later stages when things aren't going well, it's all we've got. And we have to be able to rely on that as a propellant. And it's a powerful one.
There's a line in The Matrix that Larry Fishburne gives as Morpheus. And he says, or maybe it's not. I actually I think it's whoever the bad guy was at the time, and he says, "Hope, it's your as a human race, it's your greatest weakness and it's your greatest strength." Right, and I thought that was such a perfectly delivered line, right?
Yep.
And it's so true. As founders, it's our greatest strength and weakness. It's our greatest strength for all the obvious reasons we just described, and it's our greatest weakness because it makes us do dumb shit with a smile on our face, right? It
Yeah.
makes us take ridiculous amounts of risk that can ruin us with excitement, right? And again, that is such a powerful component. Now let's talk about how you get that flywheel going.
Yeah. So I think that's super important because I think as people are listening now, they're like, okay, yeah, great, but like, where does it come from? Right.
It comes in tiny successes.
Yep.
It's that kid selling candy as that expands. And so I say look for very tiny wins as early as possible, tied to your own outcomes.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yep.
if I say, hey, you got a job and you got paid, nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But let's say you're 15 years old, right? You get a job and you get paid, and you understand the value of work and reward. Incredibly powerful. But it's different than you created that work, right?
Yep.
In your case, it would have been in looking for an opportunity to shovel a driveway, right?
Yep.
That you could get paid for, and then doing it on your own accord. Developing customers, having a product, pricing, etc.
I just thought of one of the funniest examples of early entrepreneurship. We carried our canoe 3/4 of the mile down State Route 42 to get to Deer Creek. We throw it in Deer Creek to float inside the local golf course. And we filled that thing with, I think it was like, I don't know, it was like 1,800 or 2,000 golf balls that had been hit into the river. We just dredged the river for hours on end,
I love
filled
it.
this thing up. And then we had to call my dad. Actually, walked home. There was no way to call dad. I had to walk home, ask my dad to come and bring the pickup truck so we could haul it back because we were like, we carried the canoe over when it had 2,000 golf balls in it. We could no longer carry it anywhere. Now we got all the gold. We can't get it home. But it's so funny, like where you just go looking for these things. And
Right.
I think there's something fun there because like that one was pure hope. We did all of that
Yep.
work to go find out if there were even golf balls in them. I mean, yeah, we'd seen some bad golfers. We knew there was going to be some balls in there. But like out in the middle of nowhere, London, Ohio, and we are carrying a canoe down a highway. Hope was heavily involved there. Like, I hope we go find some stuff. But
Right.
it's that mix of like hope and adventure, and that to some degree, like a little bit of childlike naivete, just to say, like, let's just go do this. Let's try it. I
Right.
hope it'll work out, but let's try it either way. There's something really powerful about that.
And the trick there is you just need to inspire one Ryan who then inspires and cajoles 10 of his friends. That's how
I inspired
that's how
one
you
Joey and one Nick, and that's
correct. That's it, right? I think the mistake is that like, we have 100 kids in a classroom, for example, and all 100 kids have to become entrepreneurs. No, technically
No.
you just have to get it right with one or two, if that.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
they will pull enough other people along that's how the flywheel gets created. Now, the other thing that happens when we create that flywheel is those people go on to have kids who are now inspired and educated with that hope. Our children, Ryan, are inspired and educated with that hope, which has so much value because you're literally grooming the next group of founders from day zero. Incredibly powerful. And what I love about this mission, and again, this is very ingrained in what we do at startups.com, is that you're basically saying, I only need to be right as far as, grooming this next round 1 in 100 times. But when I'm right,
Yep.
it'll create 1,000 people behind it. Right? That's the part that I think people miss, right? It's a germinating effect. But we need to start early. We need to get those early wins, with kids early. It doesn't have to be kids, but it's a great way to start. And even small wins are big wins. Even the small wins, Ryan, you and I were talking a while back. You were saying how like it's the person in Guatemala with a food cart. And then all of a sudden, they come home and they had more money than they had yesterday or income at all. And people go, oh, food cart. Not Microsoft, right?
Nope.
Fucking food cart, right? Like,
Just
it's
clear the fence,
amazing.
right? Figure out what's going to take me from where I am now to a place that's significantly better, right?
Right.
It's not a life of luxury, but it's a life where there was steady income and they could put food on the table every day without question. That's a big deal.
There are two very different paychecks. There's a paycheck you get from your employer, and there's a paycheck you get from yourself. Okay. There's a pride that comes with the paycheck that you create for yourself. Exactly how you
100%.
felt when you came home from a long day of being a kid, shoveling driveways. You were tired, but that money in your pocket was money, correct, right?
Yeah.
But it was money
Still
you
wake up the next
created.
morning hoping it's going to snow again.
Dude, right. That dollar I gave to the lunch lady was the best dollar I've ever spent in my life.
Right.
Not because I could get lunch. That was actually pretty cool too. But because it was my dollar and I knew I could make another one.
Remember that used to be a thing? Like you would see the first dollar
Right.
in businesses. You'd go
Yeah,
into a
you see it
business
up on
and
the wall.
on the
Right.
wall
Yeah.
behind, right, there would be the first dollar on the wall. Why? Because it took a lot of work to get to that first dollar, and getting it felt amazing, right? And it wasn't that it was a dollar, right? It's not about the amount. It's not about the, right? It's such a symbolic thing that goes so deep into the experience that individual had to get to that point, right? And then to know, because it's a fundamental representation of that hope.
We've converted hope to pride. We've converted hope to
Yep.
when somebody framed that dollar, they were proud of their accomplishment, as they should be,
Yes.
by the way.
Proud of the accomplishment, and it had been recognized by someone else, right? Someone gave them that dollar. Someone said, you've done something of enough value on your own. I am going to compensate you for it.
And if hope is contagious, pride is the bazooka cannon of contagion, because it shows everyone else that it can be done and that it should be done, which is incredibly powerful. So let's say that hope is the first leg, if not the first phase, that if we don't have hope, nothing gets started. Like that is the beginning of the flywheel, okay? But the other side of it I thought was kind of interesting was this idea of a willingness to fail, right? Let's say that this is a second leg. And people say, well, obviously in entrepreneurship, it's not like just taking a job where you are going to get paid. You're going to do a lot of work and you may fail and not get paid. But I think what people miss when they hear about that is people who are broke can't afford to fail.
Yeah.
They don't realize that the reason a lot of people can't get into entrepreneurship, folks that are in some level of poverty or low income situation, is that failure is not an option. And people used to say to me all the time, this is weird for me to even say, this is actually on a magazine cover where I'm on the cover of the magazine, right? And it said something to the effect of like something to fail. I can't remember what the phrase was. I should know because it was on the cover of this magazine.
Wasn't nothing to lose?
Nothing to lose, right? Something like that, right?
Yep.
And I think the idea was that I was so young and I was so broke that I had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I think that is such a gross misunderstanding of what being underprivileged means.
Yeah.
Dude, if I failed, I could not pay for rent. I had no home, right? I couldn't buy food.
I can't. Yeah. 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 There's a lot to lose. There's a lot.
There's way more to lose. And I think what's missing, and again, this kind of second leg in the thing, is understanding that folks who are broke, I'm just going to use that as the overall term, cannot afford to fail. And therefore, they can't afford to try.
That's the thing, right? Without any kind of gap between you and the ground, like there's no room for risk. There's just no space for risk at that point. And that's a tough one to get around, right? It's a very tough one to get around.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists. You may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it. You could go back and you could say, well, hold on a sec. That doesn't all hold up because many of the immigrants that came to America came with nothing and started phenomenal companies.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, there is a version where you can say, I have no choice to be but to be successful, but you didn't have that choice. It's not like I chose to fail, right?
Right.
So saying you didn't have any choice but to be successful, the implication, which isn't entirely wrong, is that I just had to keep grinding. Like I just couldn't stop myself. I couldn't give up because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Now, there's some truth to that, but that doesn't guarantee success. You can have that same condition and fail.
At rock bottom where there's nowhere to go but up doesn't guarantee that you go up. You can also just risk and stay at rock bottom, right?
Correct.
You can, if nothing else, risking in that sense when there's no safety net, it can actually absolutely make a bad situation worse. So let's just say it's already as bad as it could possibly be. It's also going to guarantee that you stay there.
Correct. Right. I'll give you some examples. I had so little money that a meaningful capital cost, and I'm talking like $100, was inaccessible to me. Right. I
Yep.
remember going to the ATM to the Chase Bankers Bank one back then, ATM on campus, and I needed to get like $16 because I knew that that's exactly how much I had in my bank account. But the ATM only dispensed $20 bills, and I could not get my money. I was so pissed off. I couldn't get my $16
Right.
out of the bank
They're
that I
keeping
need.
my fortune from me.
Correct. Right. And so I guess what I'm saying is at that level, you are so fundamentally constrained that
Yeah.
it's actually just way hard to be successful
Yep.
because like you can't go without a paycheck. I'll give you an example. I'm building a house, and all of the different trades that are working, like the electricians, the concrete guys, whatever, are all floating some payroll capital with their crews, some capital for the supplies, materials, until the job is done and they get paid. Well, that's a luxury to be able to have access to enough credit
Yep.
that
Yep.
you can pay someone this week, even though you're going to get paid later. Poor people don't have those fundamental luxuries. They
Correct.
don't have access to credit. They don't have
Yeah.
access to capital. And by virtue of that, they don't have that that luxury of failure, which fundamentally prevents them not only from getting started, but from being successful even if they are started. I think it's very misunderstood when folks are saying, "No, let's help these poor people out," like in a very like kind of sardonic way. Like, yes, you want to help them, but dude, if you don't understand their condition, you're not being very helpful. Right, what I'd say.
Yeah. If you can give people, like, let's say, the understanding, the motivation, the hope, all of that stuff. But if they're still in a position where risk is a luxury they can't afford,
Yeah, especially if you have
can't
family,
move forward.
right?
Right.
Yeah,
It's a hell of an anchor.
and so when we talk about, well, what do you do in that situation, right? Okay,
Yeah.
you want to help these folks out, but they actually don't have the luxury of doing what you're asking them to do, which is assume risk. You've got to provide some level of cushion. That's usually where capital comes in. Ryan, I've been banging my head against the wall for decades thinking about what this looks like. So I want to beat this up a little bit with you. There's kind of two schools of thought on this one. Okay. As I've seen it, and I'm sure there are others. One is some form of entrepreneurial welfare, right? Vis-a-vis,
Yep.
some sort of grant program or some like universal basic income, which I know is a cagey topic, but UBI for entrepreneurship. Okay.
Sure.
So some sort of like, hey, let's give that person just a little bit more net in order for them to get further.
Yep.
I don't think a lot of people would argue if they could see it being used properly. Okay. The other side of it, of course, is just straight up like venture capital for low income, right? Like, this isn't a grant. This isn't like, you don't pay it back. It's not welfare. It is an actual investment and you have to pay it back. Or said differently, like people don't pay venture capitalists back unless there's an upside. But you'd have to see enough return. It's kind of where like
Yep.
social impact investing comes on
It could go
to be able
venture
to make
debt,
that work.
right? Could do
Venture
something.
debt,
Could
kind of.
be in
Yeah,
the form of
yeah.
a loan. Could be right.
Right. When you look at those two versions, like I hate to use the term welfare because that's got such a stink to it, but some sort of support program, or social safety net, or social. And I'm not trying to just rebrand it. I'm just saying we aren't just talking about paying people to not work. We're paying people to work like hell. And then the other side of it is an investment with an expectation of return. How do you see those two camps? Like, which one kind of appeals to you differently? Like, where do you see them working differently?
The challenge is because we're trying to talk about how to elevate people out of the risk component of it, right? How do
How
you
to
de-risk it?
capitalize them so that they can pay the workers and materials on the
Yeah.
concrete job so they can do the next concrete job. Again, I'm being very simple, but
Yeah,
like,
yeah. If it's
what it
something
is.
that like, so if it's that specific, right? So if you can get into a situation where like let's not say there's a guarantee, but like it's almost factor financing at that point, right? Like
Mhm.
you're just essentially saying like we're gonna be able to give you money to overcome cash flow gaps. That's one thing. If you're saying venture debt at a larger level where it's going to be based on some further down the road possibly type outcome, that still feels like, depending on how it's structured, that could still have some risk to it,
Right.
right? For the founder, that may not be looked at as completely unrisky. Maybe I'm just becoming more of a socialist as I get older, but like I do feel like providing some sort of a minimum basic income for founders. Again, minimum basic income for founders based on other socioeconomic factors, right? The same thing
Right.
you have to do to go through like FAFSA, right? You have to go through and file your federal form for financial aid. If
Right.
you qualify, you get this much, and here are the terms. Something like that feels fairly interesting to me
Actually, hold on, pause.
because,
Ryan,
yeah,
I never drew that parallel. I'm so glad you said it, and I'm going to hand this back to you in a second, but I want you to build on that. we have exactly this welfare program for
Yes.
education.
But it implies going to get some capabilities to work instead of just actually going to work, right? So to me, if that's what we're trying to create is employable people, employ them, right? Directly. Let them employ themselves. Let them put whatever skills they have to work. And again, there could be some, the FAFSA in this case would look a bit different. You'd have to show some capabilities. You'd have to show some, not just need, right? It's not just need based. But in the same way, like even with FAFSA, really, you're passing two tests at the same time. You're passing the entrance exam to the university, and you're passing the requirements from a financial standpoint. So if you could do both of those things at the entrepreneurship level, I'd be all for that, right? There's going to be metrics you have to keep hitting. Actually, the parallel is beautiful because in the same way, if you start getting garbage grades, you're out, right? If you don't hit your metrics that the set aside for that business, whatever that is, like you got to hit revenue by month 2. You have to start employing people by month 5, whatever it is. Like we can come up with the criteria for it. It doesn't feel that hard to manage. And it has a much more direct and measurable outcome than an education.
It's got a very powerful, almost like self-direction, self-motivation, self-interest. Like one of the problems I have with paying into the university kind of scheme, if you will, is that there are really no guarantees. It's like, oh, you'll get a job. Maybe who knows if I was going to get that job anyway, right? Like it's really hard
Ask
for me
recent graduates right now how guaranteed that is. Yep.
How guaranteed they feel. But I guess what I'm saying is there's something really fascinating about this idea that the government, as an example, as the main funding entity, feels very confident that if we send more people through this amorphous thing called education, higher ed, that we'll get payouts. So we should heavily subsidize it at both the state and federal level. Families feel that way, that we should save for college because, that is the thing. And this isn't being anti-college. It's, dude, if we already have this program and it's very well understood, and like, imagine if we called that a welfare program, right? An educational welfare program, which it is. But here's what's interesting about it. Nearly every student loan is a non-collateralized loan, which is damn near impossible for a founder to get. Said differently, if I say I want a non-collateralized loan because I'm going to become a theater major, which I was, so I did make that ask, right? We're like, dude, red carpet. Here's all the opportunities for you.
Yep.
But if I want to take the same amount of capital and I want to go build what became a $700 million company, they're like, out of luck, no interest, right?
None.
Get out of here.
None
right?
whatsoever.
Go back to your
theater
program.
Yep.
and so
the irony, right?
The irony, but the parallel there is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, like it's literally staring us in the face. It's sitting there. That is the framework that you could easily just sort of copy paste over top of entrepreneurship, couple little tweaks, and you're retrofit and ready to go, right? And we have no issues with that. And the other side of that is think about the scale at which that operates, and think about the scale at which you would need to do this for entrepreneurship. There's not going to be nearly as many people that would want to do this as that, right? So it's also an infrastructure that'd be far easier to manage. And think about when you end up giving money to college students. It goes to one place, well, 2 places, the local beer hall and the university, right? But it goes to the university. When you give money to entrepreneurs, where does it go? It doesn't go in their pocket because yes, we can create some sort of minimum livable thing, right? But also it's going to go to local suppliers. It's going to go to their employees. It's going to go to other service providers.
Literally
it's going to go
drive the economy
right back into the economy.
Yeah, you directly drive the economy. Now, here's what's also interesting. You put somebody through 4 years of undergrad, okay, and they go on to become middle manager. They're going to generate a tiny amount of payroll taxes, by virtue of what they kick into the system, Social Security, what have you, in the U.S. But you create an employer, they're going to pay payroll taxes, which a lot of people, actually, our listeners definitely know this, but a lot of people don't know that employers match the amount that, in payroll taxes that they pay directly in addition to what you're paying, right?
Yeah.
So like I love when people say Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk doesn't pay their taxes. Dude, do you have any idea how much Tesla or Amazon has paid in payroll taxes, right?
Yeah.
More than any human will ever pay in a million lifetimes.
No loopholes for those. Zero loopholes for those. It doesn't matter.
Come on,
there's a loophole for everything when you're wealthy. Nope.
Yeah,
payroll taxes get paid every single time.
As business owners, do you have any idea how many taxes we pay? Right? Without even trying. And so my point is, you give this money directly to the right individual, meaning just somebody who has an affinity for entrepreneurship. You're not only, quote, like paying for an education, but you're also paying exponential amounts of givebacks and taxes. You're then creating jobs. You're then inspiring more people. I mean, the investment on an ROI basis, we're going to take Pell, in everything you pick up through FAFSA, et cetera.
Yep.
And instead pour 10% of that specifically into entrepreneurship, dude, the ROI on that
Yeah.
would be
Feels pretty hefty.
it feels pretty hefty.
I feel like we need to
But
call somebody, Will.
if only there was a platform, right? But I look at that as well, just going back to failure, being a luxury. That's essentially what we've done in education. If people had to pay out of their own pocket, right? There was no loan program, there was no subsidy. You had to pay with your extra cash, which I did because I worked my way through college. You'd never do it. I was making $10 an hour, right? Like trying to pay for education and everything else like that. And it was brutal. And I was paying cash on the barrelhead because I didn't have access to debt. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, we have a program now that honestly doesn't work that well, being higher ed, where we are already deferring failure, right? We're saying, look, we get it. You can't live and go to school at the same time and, afford to fail. So for 4 or 5, sometimes 6 years, not counting grad school, we're gonna fund you. We're gonna make sure your bills are taken care of, that your necessary expenses are covered.
Yeah.
So that you can have this pad in order to do this thing.
To go do
in
it.
entrepreneurship, we have one program. It's called Go Fuck Yourself.
Yeah. Right. And you still have to pay to
every
apply.
level. Yeah, exactly. That's our FAFSA. And it's brutal. I genuinely believe that creating a safety net, and I mean this in the most productive way possible, would have a massive impact on a lower income or impoverished community that would allow them to do things that they just simply can't do. I think that's the second leg. Give people just enough pad to allow them to absorb some failure to create success.
Well, man, just hold on that for a second and think about how that impacts the first leg. Think about how, knowing that you have that, think about how that changes the hope dynamic, because there is that line you have to draw with, like, is this hope or is this delusion? Right? I mean, really, like, because it depends on the outcome. I want, but if I'm held back by the risk component, if I can't risk, then hope is just delusion. If I actually can't go do the thing, it is just delusion. And so if we can have hope, but if hope can be built on a foundation of what just basic security, right?
Right. Yes.
Security.
Yes.
I'm not going to starve to death by trying to do this. Then I can actually put my hope to work.
So if we're talking about FAFSA, we're talking about education. That leads us to the third leg, which is the idea of a bunch of people in any community, impoverished or whatever, going out and building successful startups with no access to the education of what this takes, the mentorship, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of saying we want more doctors, but we won't have any medical schools.
Yeah.
Right? In order to become a doctor, you sort of have to go out there on your own, get some surgeries under your belt, kind of figure it out. And if people don't die in the process, you get a high five, you become a doctor. That's literally what entrepreneurship is. It's go out there, figure it out. We're going to give you no education. We're going to give you no guidance. And if you somehow figure out one of the most complex possibilities you could possibly encounter, then we'll tax the hell out of you.
Then we'll tax you. Yeah.
I think that I teach this class in middle school at my kids' school on entrepreneurship. And what I tell the kids in the first day of class is that what I'm going to teach you, I'm going to teach you what's possible, essentially hope, right? But I'm also going to give you the tools, the specific tools to go do it. And I call that agency, the ability to recognize that you can be your own governance and the tools to make that happen. What we do at startups.com is it's literally what we do all day long. We teach 1.3 million companies and the founders within them that agency, those tools. We give them that mentorship to say, here's what to go do next. And they're like, damn, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. And I was like, how could you?
Yeah, how would you?
How would you know to do any of this?
Right?
Yeah,
you're not in medical school. You're in entrepreneurship where there is no one to tell you. Yeah.
Correct. I think what we're missing, and again, this is directly part of what you and I do. What we're missing is a very structured way to say, here are like the 20 things that you need to know, whether it's fundraising, getting customers, you name it. But here's how to actually do it. Because the chances are that wherever you came from, you actually know how to do all of these different things all at the same time, all related to a product that you just invented 5 seconds ago with a team that never existed, in a market that probably doesn't exist yet, is zero, right?
Right.
It's zero, right?
Zero.
And yet the fundamental programs and access and fabric of teaching people how to do this is so fucked up. Like, it's so bad. It blows my mind that we have as many successful founders as we have, given how insanely broken the education and mentorship component is.
Yeah.
worldwide.
Goes back to that hope component. And look, hope doesn't always come from a position of like, I have nothing, so I hope I'll get something, right? Hope comes from like seeing that problem you want to solve. It comes from, wanting to make that dent in the universe. And it comes from not wanting to suffer anymore from something you've suffered from, or not wanting someone else to suffer. And so it makes a lot of people do really crazy shit. When it
Yeah,
comes down
right,
to
right.
it,
No, I
right?
agree. What's crazy to me, okay, imagine a founder checked the first two boxes. They said,
Yeah.
I've got the hope. I genuinely believe in myself or my opportunity, or I even believe that the world exists in a way that could potentially benefit me. Not everybody feels that way. Second, I've got a tiny bit of capital. Forget how I got it, right? Just I have a
Yep.
tiny bit of capital, or I live with my parents
You get a
and they'll
safety
just
net of
keep
some
feeding
sort.
me, right? I have
Yep.
some sort of safety net. So I got those two things covered. But I still know what the hell I'm doing. That is the given, no matter where you're coming from. We have
Yep.
people coming to us from all walks of life, from the most impoverished to the most privileged. But the one thing that they share is they've never done this before, and they have no idea what they're doing, and they're terrified. What a massive impediment. I go back to, again, I always use the if everybody wanted to become doctors, but med school didn't exist, and you just all had to figure it out as you go. First off, think of how many doctors we'd have that are the most terrifying doctors of all time.
Yeah.
And
Think
second,
about how
think
many
of how
less
few
friends
doctors
you'd
we'd
have
have.
because they would have gone through,
But think of how
medical
few
practice with
doctors
bad
we'd
people.
have,
Yeah.
right? We wouldn't have hospitals we have it now, right? Like it would be so unheard of that would even be a career path, right?
Yeah.
That would be the child of an Indian family being like, hey, mom, dad, I want to become a doctor. Like, oh God, no, don't do that,
Right.
right? We're just gonna
Right.
go figure stuff out and maybe like not kill people.
It is funny because when we look at like how much entrepreneurship drives the economy, right? Like
Yeah,
when we look around, like a lot of the businesses that we engage with, most of the things that we do had some level of entrepreneurial beginnings, right? Like
correct.
even hospitals to some degree had an entrepreneurial element to them because we used to just have
Yes,
doctors and we had offices and we had surgeons, but we didn't have hospitals, right? Hospitals really
right.
the business side of medicine. And so, despite that, we haven't created this sort of certain pathway around becoming an entrepreneur that we have around these other things. And of course, we've
Right.
done some things, right? Like there are university programs to teach you how to be an entrepreneur. I think you and I would both kind of shake our heads a little bit at the outcomes there. But like there's some stuff has happened, but not nearly as much, right?
I think for a lot of people, Ryan, I think the part that they want to do it, but they have no access, or even if they had access, like I can get into Harvard, I can get into their education or their entrepreneurial education program. I don't know if they have one, but assuming they did, it still probably isn't going to teach me most of the things I need to know. Like in
It's
other
not.
words, the places
Yep.
people would fundamentally go generally just don't work. Well
Right.
intentioned, right? Always well intentioned, but fairly ineffective. And so I look at it and I say, damn, dude, that seems like a pretty big problem. If what you just said a moment ago, which is so true, that in the United States alone, it literally is the definition of a startup. It was started by a bunch of founders who then had a crazy idea to go into an unproven market, right? And were
Yep.
willing to fight for it, quite literally, and created an atmosphere where hope was its greatest asset. People come to the United States because they believe that their lives can be better.
Yes.
There aren't
Yep.
a lot of countries that have that universal calling card that says your life will likely be better if you come to this country. Incredibly powerful asset, right?
Yeah.
One questionably that maybe we're trying to destroy right now, but I'm not going to be political about it. But that said, we then have this ability for people to come here and say, damn, dude, there's enough wealth here, generationally, et cetera, that there's enough people out there that can make these sacrifices. And we have enough of a social safety net. Again, that's even coming down to there's people that can live with their parents because their parents can afford to support them in order to take some chances. There are many countries, many parts of the world, that's not even an option,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
if you don't work and bring in money this week, we're all screwed. So of course you can't not work and not bring in money this week because you might bring in more else later. But then if you think we built a country this big and this powerful as far as an economic engine without ever having any formality as to how we did it, is kind of mind blowing.
It is. It
Like
is.
how the hell
It
did
is.
we even get here?
People that were willing to take the risks, right?
We got here despite ourselves.
Yeah, despite the odds. Look, it did cost a lot of people everything. And there's
It
plenty
did.
of stories, and look,
Right.
so it is not, yeah, the road to entrepreneurial success is paved with the failures of others in a lot of ways.
It is.
And I think one of the questions we're asking is, does it have to be, right? Does it
Correct.
have to be massive success versus abject failure? Why are
Right.
we drawing this hard line? And why are we not creating better conditions such that, the outcomes could be better defined, the outcomes could be more reasonably achieved? De-risk it for people a little bit. Like I think it would be amazing to be able to do that, and
Correct.
amazing at a lot of levels, not just to say so people can try it, but like when it starts to work. And I guess you sort of have to look at that and go, if it's already worked to any degree, and we can look around and go, it's actually worked a hell of a lot. Where you and I sit right now, we're in two different places. We're using a tool right now that was built by someone, an entrepreneur, to facilitate this type of video communication. I'm using an iPhone started by, built by one of the most famous entrepreneurs of our generation to film this thing. And just like all the stuff that's around us, like we're surrounded by this stuff. Clearly it works. So the fact that we're not doing more as a society, as a nation, as a community, just even of global entrepreneurs, to provide a better pathway for this feels kind of bananas.
Well, here's what I would say. The initial question, can entrepreneurship help alleviate poverty? It already has. It didn't make all poverty go away, right?
No.
But if you had any question about whether entrepreneurship can have the transformative effect of transforming communities, it did for an entire country.
Yes.
Right? Like entrepreneurship, like America is a case study of entrepreneurship at so many levels. And so to your point just a moment ago, the fact that we haven't said, oh, I know, let's go all in on this thing in a very deliberate manner to inspire hope, to create that safety net to get more people to be able to make that leap. And this is everywhere, by the way, globally.
Yeah.
And to be able to provide the tools to say, and here's how to do it. It blows me away that it hasn't been done formally and deliberately on a global scale. What's so exciting about it is the fact that as we head toward this path, toward this goal, everything we just described, of inspiring hope, of creating an environment where you can try, and creating the tools to teach you how to do it, we actually don't even need to get it that right. Success compounds. Success compounds. We need to be right 1 in 100 times, because when we are, that one is going to exponentially blow up this flywheel that we're trying to create. So all we need to do as a society globally isn't to try to make everybody an entrepreneur. It's to try to plant the seeds so that we get a few. And those few plant the seeds to get even more. And we make entrepreneurship a fundamental part of the fabric of our society globally, which gives everyone the opportunity and the hope to build something and build their own life on their own terms, exactly how they want to live.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the Startups.com community. Check out the Startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.